Cops regretted arresting this old black veteran. Just 30 minutes later, FBI agents came to the station. From the moment the old man stepped onto that quiet Maplewood sidewalk, something felt off. His faded uniform jacket told a story no one bothered to ask about. 2 patrol cars screeched up, and in a flash of badges and raised voices, the old black veteran found himself in handcuffs, all without a single question about who he was or what he'd done for this country. If only the officers had paused for 1 second, had looked into his weary, noble eyes, they might have seen the truth. But it was too late. In less than 30 minutes, a storm was brewing, and what was about to unfold would shake this small town to its very core. Hello friends, if you new here then don't forget to hit subscribe button, and if you like then hit the like button also, and don't forget to tell me in the comments where you from watching this video. In the heart of North Carolina sat the unassuming town of Maplewood, perched on the edge of farmland and overshadowed by the distant bustle of Raleigh. It was a place where folks prided themselves on old-fashioned values, neighbors who greeted each other with friendly waves, potluck dinners at the community church every third Saturday, and children who played with wooden sticks pretending they were knights of old. The local newspaper, the Maplewood Herald, circulated mild headlines: lost pets, new library hours, volunteer opportunities, rarely anything scandalous or electrifying. Yet beneath Maplewood's cozy exterior lay deep ruts of tension, formed by decades of subtle prejudices. Most people brushed them away as just the way things are around here, content to walk the familiar sidewalks without looking for cracks. But cracks have a way of revealing themselves. On a balmy summer afternoon, those cracks would become fissures, the resulting quake reaching all the way into the local police department and eventually unleashing the full might of the FBI. That day began like any other, sunlight streaming across the modest houses, the sweet smell of magnolia trees clinging in the air. Cars rolled gently down Main Street, passing Maplewood Grocery, Winston's Hardware, and the Old Veterans Hall. By mid-morning, folks were already popping in and out of shops, greeting each other, unaware that anything extraordinary was about to happen. John Bowman, a lanky 72-year-old black veteran, stepped off the local bus near Maplewood Park. The bus driver, a jovial man named Ross, offered John a polite nod. John responded with a friendly salute. He wore a military-style jacket, faded from decades of wear, over pressed khaki pants, and he carried a weathered duffel bag. The jacket bore patches that read Airborne and Fort Benning, reminding anyone who cared to notice that he had served his country. But few, if any, noticed. John took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the day comfort his tired bones. His destination was the Veterans Hall on Maplewood Central Square, where he'd been invited to speak about his experiences in the 82nd Airborne Division during the Vietnam War. The invitation had come from a local teacher who heard John share his story at a VA hospital near Fort Bragg. Intrigued by the man's insights, she asked him if he'd share his experiences with her high school students, who had been learning about the Vietnam era. He was early, nearly 40 minutes ahead of schedule, so John decided to wander around, taking in the small-town ambience. He admired the grand oak trees, the carefully manicured lawns, the chirping birds, and the gentle pace of life. Yet behind the pleasant exterior, he felt subtle stares drifting his way. A passerby slowed, apparently discomforted by the old man in the uniform jacket, another whispered something to a friend, and they both shot suspicious glances. John tried to ignore it, he was used to that, far too used to it. After all, he'd spent decades traveling across the country advocating for fellow veterans who struggled to receive benefits they were owed. He'd seen all sorts of reactions to a proud black man wearing a uniform in places where it wasn't exactly common. "Excuse me, sir," a voice said from behind. John turned to see a tall, brawny figure in a police uniform. The embroidered nameplate read, "Officer Higgins." A younger officer, smaller in stature, with Officer Brown on his uniform, hovered a step behind. Their approach was tentative but laced with a caution that John had seen before. It was that look that said, "Why are you here?" "Yes, officer," John replied politely, heart pounding just a little faster than usual. "We got a call about a suspicious individual wearing military attire wandering around the square," Officer Higgins began in a firm voice. "May we see some identification?" A suspicious individual. John's mouth went dry. He knew he had every right to be there, this was a public space. Yet the tension in the air was palpable. The older officer's hand hovered near his holster. John swallowed hard, rummaging in his jacket for identification, determined to avoid escalating the situation. As he handed over his ID, John calmly explained he was a veteran scheduled to speak at the local high school event. Officer Higgins took the ID, scrutinizing it as if it might be forged. Officer Brown tried to peer over his partner's shoulder, also suspicious. There was a hint of uncertainty in Brown's eyes, though he seemed a bit uneasy, as if he wasn't entirely comfortable with the direction this was taking. Just then, a black and white patrol car pulled up, and a third officer stepped out. This one was Officer Reyes, who carried himself with an air of readiness. Wordlessly, he surveyed the situation, stepping beside Higgins. John felt claustrophobic, 3 officers for one old man in a military jacket. For a moment, it seemed like Higgins and Brown might let John go. The ID was valid after all. But Reyes was flipping through his notepad. He muttered something about trespassing concerns and unverified presence. John felt a sudden wave of frustration, but he steadied himself. He was no stranger to prejudice. He had faced enemy fire in the jungles of Vietnam and the poisonous stares in certain small-town American diners afterward. He'd endured it. He'd survive this too. He tried to remain calm. In the distance, a few pedestrians paused, noticing the unusual gathering. Some took pictures on their phones, troublesome, but it might prove useful later. The old man with the battered duffel bag, the uniform jacket bearing proud insignia, was being questioned relentlessly. Suddenly, the air crackled with tension. Without warning, Reyes reached for John's arm, twisting it behind his back. "Hands behind your head," he ordered, voice sharp as a whip. John gasped in pain but complied, disoriented. He couldn't quite believe it was happening. Brown looked startled but followed his fellow officer's lead. John's head spun. He tried to remain calm, repeating, "I'm not resisting, I'm not resisting." Then came the handcuffs. The cold metal bit into John's wrists. It was humiliating. People who had been passing by stopped to watch the scene, some whispering or recording with their cell phones. The lump in John's throat threatened to choke him. The 72-year-old had survived ambushes in Southeast Asia, but this was a different kind of ambush, one from within the country he had served. "Wait, officer!" John cried out. "I have an invitation. Someone from Maplewood High School, Ms. Anderson, she invited me." But Reyes and Higgins weren't hearing it. Brown fidgeted, looking slightly uncomfortable, but he didn't intervene. The humiliating pat-down began, culminating in Reyes snatching John's bag to inspect its contents. Inside were only personal belongings, a portfolio containing letters of commendation and pictures of John's old unit, a worn copy of the U.S. Constitution he carried wherever he went, some toiletries, and a small gift for Ms. Anderson's class, a vintage set of campaign medals to show the students. The officers found nothing incriminating, yet that seemed only to fuel Reyes's suspicion. "Where'd you get this stuff?" Reyes demanded, holding up the battered manila folder full of commendations and service documents. He acted as if John had stolen them from some unsuspecting real veteran. "They're mine," John snapped, his composure fraying. Then he closed his eyes, fought to stay calm, and added quietly, "They're mine, officer." Officer Higgins stepped aside and radioed in. He requested a check on John Bowman, listing the date of birth from John's ID. John could hear the dispatch operator's voice faintly crackling through the receiver. His record was clean, no outstanding warrants, no criminal history, not even a parking ticket. Yet the older officer's jaw clenched as if something still didn't sit right with him. It was in that tense moment that Brown quietly said, "Higgins, maybe we should back off." Higgins barked. He locked eyes with John. "We're bringing you in for questioning. Let's go." And just like that, the quiet day in Maplewood turned into a glaring spotlight of injustice. John Bowman was led to the patrol car, mind spinning, heart aching, and the world feeling more fragile than ever. Onlookers whispered and captured it all on camera, but not one of them stepped forward to stop it. The humiliation coursed through John's veins as he was guided, almost shoved, into the back seat. What none of these officers realized or even cared to investigate was that John Bowman was not just any veteran. He was a man with powerful friends in high places, people who would come looking for him if something went wrong, people with the authority to turn Maplewood upside down. The clock was ticking. By the time the squad car pulled away from the curb, a storm was already brewing in a place far beyond Maplewood. Within 30 minutes, that storm would arrive at the Maplewood Police Department in the form of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Officer Higgins drove, lips pressed into a thin line, occasionally glancing back at John through the rearview mirror. Sitting in the cramped back seat, his wrists still bound, John couldn't help but reflect on the countless times he'd risked his life to defend freedom, to uphold the Constitution. Now, in that same country, he was treated like a criminal for existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time, in the wrong skin. After a short, silent drive, they arrived at the Maplewood Police Station, a squat brown brick building that looked more like a small-town library than a fortress of law enforcement. It had a single row of angled parking spaces out front. A modest sign with the Maplewood town seal hung above the double doors. Officer Brown got out first and opened the back door for John, motioning for him to step out. The young officer seemed uneasy, swallowing. Hard as he helped John stand, John noticed the slight tremor in Brown's hand. Perhaps the young officer was grappling with a shred of conscience, but he didn't speak and he didn't remove the cuffs. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed overhead. The reception area had a single desk, a row of plastic chairs for waiting, and a worn tile floor that squeaked with every step. Behind the desk sat Linda, the department's administrative assistant, who looked up with a perplexed expression at the sight of a handcuffed senior citizen. Who is," she began, but Higgins cut her off. "We'll handle this," he muttered. "He's here for questioning." John's mind reeled at the absurdity of it all. He hadn't done a thing wrong, yet they marched him past Linda into a small interrogation room at the back of the station. The room was no bigger than a storage closet, 2 chairs, a small metal table, and no windows. A single overhead light buzzed, casting a harsh glare. Higgins all but shoved John into one of the chairs, still cuffed. "We'll be back," Higgins said, leaving the door open a crack. Officers Higgins, Reyes, and Brown gathered in the hallway. Leaning back in his chair, John tried to rub his aching wrists, but the cuffs dug into his flesh. He exhaled slowly, calming himself. He recalled the discipline he'd learned in training, how to center his mind in moments of stress. Decades had passed since his basic training at Fort Benning, but those lessons remained etched into his bones. He overheard fragments of conversation, Reyes's urgent whisper, "He's got to be up to something." Higgins, "We'll run a deeper check." Brown, "Should we call the chief?" Reyes, ignoring the question, asked, "What if he's AWOL or something?" Brown pointed out calmly, "He's 72, that doesn't even make sense." Their voices grew muffled as they walked away. John slumped in the chair, recalling the last time he'd been in police custody. It was nearly 50 years ago, during a protest in his hometown over civil rights. He'd felt fear then too, but back then he'd also felt a sense of unity, marching alongside others who believed in a better future. Right now, he was all alone in that gray-walled room, waiting for justice that felt out of reach. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. Then 30. John strained to catch the time from a clock that hung on the hallway wall beyond the partly open door. He felt the throb in his wrists intensify and stiffness in his back from the awkward angle. He tried to find some measure of comfort, but it was nearly impossible. He began to wonder if Miss Anderson at Maplewood High School would call the station about his absence. Would anyone look for him? Just as he was about to give in to the swirl of questions in his mind, a commotion erupted at the front desk, raised voices, hurried footsteps, the squeak of the door. John heard Linda exclaim, "What? FBI?" That single word jolted him upright. FBI. It was happening faster than he'd anticipated, though perhaps not a total surprise. He had a dear friend in high places, Colonel Martin Friedman, someone who promised John that if he ever found himself in trouble he couldn't handle, Friedman would pick up the phone and start making calls. John had never planned on actually using that promise, but apparently fate had decided otherwise. The noise outside grew louder. Linda's voice, shrill with confusion, carried into the hallway. "But you'll have to speak to the chief, she's not here right now, she's out at a fundraiser." "Wait a minute, sir, please," then came another voice, calm yet authoritative. "We need to see the detainee immediately." John's pulse quickened. His heart hammered. He wasn't sure exactly who had arrived, but it was clear they meant business. In the corridor, hurried footsteps came closer, overshadowed by Linda's protests. "But you can't just barge in. They're in the interrogation wing." Next came the squeak of that hallway door. Two individuals stepped into Jay's line of vision. They were dressed in dark suits with the crisp look of federal agents. One was a tall, imposing woman in her early 40s with shoulder-length black hair. The other was a shorter, stockier man, balding slightly with sharp, penetrating eyes. Both flashed their FBI credentials at the baffled desk sergeant who had just walked out from behind the reception area. "Agents Ramirez and Dalton, FBI," the tall woman said. "We're here to see the individual brought in half an hour ago, John Bowman." The desk sergeant, who had been filling in for the absent police chief, stammered, "He's in the, holding room." But before gesturing toward the interrogation area, Agents Ramirez and Dalton moved swiftly without waiting for an escort. Linda trailed behind, looking frazzled. At that moment, Higgins emerged from somewhere in the back carrying a file of papers. His eyes widened when he saw the two agents. "Who are you?" he demanded, though his voice betrayed a flicker of unease. Agent Ramirez held up her badge once more. "FBI. We have reason to believe you're detaining a respected U.S. Army veteran under questionable circumstances." Officer Higgins stiffened. "This is a local matter. We haven't charged him with anything yet. There's no reason for the FBI to." Before he could finish, Agent Dalton stepped forward, looking unimpressed. "We have direct orders from Washington to ensure Mr. John Bowman's safety and release. We were alerted that he was forcibly taken in despite having valid identification and no cause for arrest." Now it was Reyes's turn to speak up. He emerged from another corridor, brow furrowed in defiance. "You can't just come in here and take over. This is our jurisdiction." Ramirez gave him a frosty stare. "Actually, yes we can, when civil rights violations are at play, especially involving a decorated veteran. A federal investigation can be launched immediately." She brushed past Reyes and moved toward the interrogation room. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to see him." Higgins, Reyes, and Brown followed in a state of near panic. Reyes hissed under his breath, "Who the hell called them?" The group turned the corner and entered the small interrogation room. John looked up from his seat, relief flooding his features. Though still cuffed, he managed a small smile. Agent Dalton's mouth tightened at the sight of the handcuffs on an elderly man, the angry red marks around Jay's wrists. "Jesus," Dalton murmured. Agent Ramirez spun around to glare at Higgins. "Remove those cuffs immediately." For a moment, Higgins hesitated, as if still trying to assert some authority. But under Ramirez's icy stare, his resolve melted. He pulled the key from his belt and reluctantly unlocked John's restraints. John let out a small groan as he rubbed his wrists, grateful to be free from the binding. "Mr. Bowman," Agent Ramirez said, voice gentle, "I'm Agent Ramirez with the FBI. Are you hurt?" He grimaced, flexing his stiff fingers. "I'll be fine," he said quietly. "Thank you for coming." Behind them, Officer Brown was practically swallowing his own tongue with guilt, stepping back into the corner. Reyes kept his face locked in a scowl, but the tension around his eyes hinted at worry. Higgins simply looked furious and lost all at once. "Could someone explain what happened here?" Agent Dalton asked, scanning the room. "Because we're hearing that Mr. Bowman was taken into custody without probable cause." Higgins seemed to find his voice. "We received a call about a suspicious person. Mr. Bowman refused to cooperate and we brought him in for questioning." "That's a lie," John said calmly, though there was a tremor in his voice. "I gave you my ID. I told you why I was here. I did everything you asked. You wouldn't listen." Reyes tried to jump in. "We had reason to believe." Dalton cut him off. "Reason to believe what, exactly?" "That a decorated Army veteran carrying official identification was what, planning a terror attack? Robbing the Veterans Hall he was invited to speak at? Or maybe just the crime of walking while black?" The silence that followed was deafening. Higgins swallowed hard, shooting a nasty glance at Dalton but said nothing. Brown shifted on his feet, face flushed. Reyes glared at the floor. Agent Ramirez turned to John. "Mr. Bowman, if you need medical assistance or if you wish to file a complaint, we can make arrangements right away. We can also have legal counsel provided if you'd like to press charges." John considered the offer, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. A swirl of conflicting emotions welled in his chest. He thought about all the battles he'd fought overseas and at home. He thought about the speech he was supposed to give at the high school that day, how those students might never know the lessons he'd hoped to share. Then he looked at the floor, remembering how he was forcibly detained, humiliated, disrespected. In a soft voice, he said, "I want to go speak to those kids. They asked me to be there. That's why I came." Ramirez and Dalton exchanged a glance. Dalton nodded. "We'll see that you get there," he promised, "but first we have some business to settle here." Turning on her heel, Ramirez fixed the officers with a steely gaze. "We need to speak to your chief of police immediately." The room was silent, thick with tension. Reyes finally spoke up, clearing his throat. "Chief Keller is at a fundraiser in Raleigh. She's not due back until late this evening." Dalton tapped a quick message into his phone. "We'll reach her," he said brusquely, then facing Higgins, "You, officer, escort Mr. Bowman out to the reception area. Remove all your paperwork on him from the system. He leaves here with a clean record, no charges, and an apology. Understood?" Higgins looked ready to argue, but seeing no backup from Reyes or Brown, he gritted his teeth and managed a curt nod. "Yes, sir," he mumbled. John stood, stretching out his stiff body. Agent Ramirez gestured for him to follow her. "Let's get you out of this room, Mr. Bowman." A wave of relief washed over John as he stepped into the hallway. He noticed Linda at the reception desk, her expression a mix of curiosity and sympathy. As they moved, John heard murmurs of other officers in the station, some slipping away into offices, some just staring in shocked silence. Higgins, walking ahead of them, stuck the folder he'd been carrying into a drawer behind the front desk and turned to Linda. "Erase any record of this," he said in a low voice. "Under booking logs, this never happened." Linda hesitated, giving John a quick glance. She looked confused, uncertain if this was the right thing to do, but still followed orders. She began typing on her computer. John watched her with a pang of pity. She was just a woman trying to keep her job, caught in the crossfire of this fiasco. Satisfied, Higgins turned to John, fists clenched at his sides, face reddened. In a forced tone, he said, Mr. Bowman, my apologies for the misunderstanding." John's gaze locked on Higgins's face. He could see the man's eyes flicker with resentment. The apology was hollow, forced under pressure, but John didn't lash out. He simply nodded. "If you'd just taken a moment to listen," he said, voice calm yet laden with sadness. "This never would have happened." Higgins said nothing more. He stormed away, shoulders stiff, leaving Officer Brown awkwardly behind. The young officer stared at John, guilt weighing heavy in his eyes. For a moment, it looked like Brown wanted to say something, but he just bowed his head and backed out of the reception area. John turned toward Agents Ramirez and Dalton. "I'm ready." Agent Dalton placed a hand on Jay's shoulder. "We'll make sure you get the respect you deserve, Mr. Bowman. Let's go." With that, they pushed through the station's front doors into the sunlit afternoon. A cluster of curious bystanders who had gathered across the street snapped photos on their phones. The story of the old black veteran arrested by Maplewood police had already begun spreading like wildfire on social media. John could only imagine the frantic calls the chief of police would be getting when she found out what had happened in her own station. Outside, an unmarked SUV was parked, hazard lights blinking. Ramirez gestured to it. "We'll drive you over to the high school, Mr. Bowman, and after that, we'd like to speak with you privately to file an official statement. There needs to be accountability." John gave them both a grateful nod, though his back still ached and his wrists were sore. As he climbed into the back of the SUV, he cast one last look at the Maplewood police station's glass doors. Behind them, he could see Officer Brown standing in the lobby, eyes downcast in shame. Officer Reyes was in the background, scowling and talking hurriedly into a phone. Somewhere within those walls, the seeds of fate were being sown, seeds that would produce a reckoning no one in that police department could escape. The door to the SUV closed, shutting out the chaotic scene. John Bowman took a slow breath and closed his eyes. The worst was over for now, but in the grand scheme of things, this was just the beginning of a tidal wave about to crash upon Maplewood. The FBI had arrived. The headlines were about to explode, and the men who had pinned an innocent veteran to the ground in handcuffs would soon learn just how steep the price for injustice could be. By the time Agents Ramirez and Dalton pulled into the parking lot of Maplewood High School, classes were nearly ending for the day. The wide brick building sprawled across a neatly kept lawn. A flagpole in front bore the stars and stripes fluttering in a gentle breeze. Students who should have been in last period classes lingered restlessly by the main entrance. Word had spread that something dramatic was happening involving the guest speaker. Everyone seemed abuzz. As John climbed out of the SUV, a sense of normalcy washed over him. For a moment, he was finally where he was supposed to be. Even though the day had taken a dreadful turn, his spirit lifted at the thought of speaking to young people about perseverance, sacrifice, and the meaning of service. He straightened his jacket, tugged at the wrinkled collar, and tried to ignore the dull ache around his wrists. Agent Ramirez cleared her throat. "You all right?" "I'm fine," John replied, forcing a small smile. "I just need a moment." The trio walked toward the front doors where a flustered principal, Miss Bowers, rushed out to greet them. She was a short, bespectacled woman wearing a navy blue pantsuit. Her face showed a mix of relief and worry. "Mr. Bowman, thank goodness," she exclaimed. "We've been trying to call you in the police station. Miss Anderson is inside. She was worried sick when you didn't show." "I'm sorry to have caused concern," John said gently. "I had an unexpected delay." Miss Bowers nodded at the agents and led them into the school's lobby. "We still have time left in the school day, and many of the students have waited to hear you. Miss Anderson insisted we hold off as long as possible. She's in the auditorium." Walking down the hall, John passed rows of metal lockers and open classroom doors, where teachers paused mid-sentence as they spotted him, whispering to each other. Normally, such an environment, children excited to learn, would delight him. Today, he carried the weight of what had happened, the sting of humiliation that still lingered. Finally, they reached the auditorium's backstage entrance. Miss Bowers pushed open the heavy door, revealing a cavernous space filled with students. The stage lights beamed across a sea of faces. Miss Anderson, a tall slender woman with curly hair, hurried up to John, tears welling in her eyes. "Mr. Bowman, are you all right? I was so worried." He gave her a kind nod. "I'm sorry to have caused alarm. Something happened, but I'm here now." Miss Anderson squeezed his hands gently, taking note of the redness around his wrists. Alarm flashed in her eyes, but she swallowed her questions, focusing instead on the moment at hand. "We're ready whenever you are." The students have been studying the Vietnam War era, and they were so excited to hear directly from a veteran. John tried to push the morning's events aside, the humiliating arrest, the harsh treatment. None of that should overshadow the purpose that had brought him here. Taking a deep breath, he stepped out from behind the thick maroon curtains and into the spotlight. The chatter in the audience subsided into attentive silence. His voice carried through the microphone, warm yet resolute. "Good afternoon, students of Maplewood High. My name is John Bowman, and I served as part of the 82nd Airborne Division in Vietnam." He shared anecdotes about his training at Fort Benning, the camaraderie he found among fellow soldiers, the terror of helicopter drops into unknown territory. He spoke of fallen friends and the heartbreak of coming home to a country torn apart by protest, mistrust, and sometimes hatred. His words painted vivid pictures of a past that was raw and real, connecting with the students in a way no textbook could. He talked about the complexities of war, how the battlefield doesn't always stay on foreign shores. It can follow you home, manifesting in prejudice or ignorance. And through it all, he reminded them of the ideals worth fighting for: honor, equality, and compassion. By the time he finished, many of the students wore solemn expressions, a few dabbed at tears. Miss Anderson stood at the edge of the stage, clasping her hands together in gratitude. John gently closed with a lesson about resilience. "When I look at all of you," he said, voice trembling slightly, "I see hope. I see future leaders, teachers, doctors, and innovators. But never forget, the battles we fight in life aren't always in distant lands. Sometimes, they're right here at home. Standing up for what is right. Treating each other with dignity. Those are battles too, and they matter." A hush enveloped the auditorium. Then applause swelled, reverberating off the walls. Students rose from their seats, clapping and cheering. John's eyes moistened with emotion. He had almost been deprived of this moment, and it touched him more deeply than he could express. Miss Anderson rushed forward, handing him a small plaque. "To John Bowman, with gratitude from Maplewood High for your service and your words of wisdom," she said into the microphone. The applause continued, and John bowed his head, humbled by the gesture. At that moment, Agent Ramirez and Agent Dalton stood to one side, out of the limelight, letting John have his well-deserved recognition. But as the applause began to wane, they exchanged meaningful glances. The business that had brought them to Maplewood was far from over. Following the speech, Miss Anderson invited John and the FBI agents to her classroom for a quick reception. A handful of students who were part of the school's history club joined, buzzing with excitement. They asked John questions, snapped group photos, and offered him homemade cookies from a bake sale. John, perched on the edge of a desk, did his best to focus on the students' enthusiasm, but in the back of his mind, he felt the dull ache of what had happened just hours ago. Occasionally, he glanced at Agents Ramirez and Dalton, who stood politely near the door, their presence a stark reminder of the chaos still unfolding outside the school's walls. The conversation was interrupted when Principal Bowers burst into the classroom, her face drawn with worry. She beckoned Ramirez over, whispering something urgent. The agent nodded and excused herself, motioning for Dalton to follow. John watched as the two agents spoke in hushed tones with Miss Bowers. He could make out only fragments: the media, outside, town in uproar, Chief Keller. Then Agent Ramirez nodded solemnly and stepped back into the room. "Mr. Bowman," she said, clearing her throat. "We need to leave now. There's a developing situation at the police station. The media has descended, and tensions are running high. We'd like your cooperation and your statement, but first, we need to ensure your safety." John sighed, eyes lingering on the eager faces of the students around him. He gently patted a boy on the shoulder, then slid off the desk. "Thank you all for listening to my story," he said to the group. The students erupted in applause again, some shouting, "Thank you for your service." With that, John left the classroom alongside the agents. Miss Bowers accompanied them to the school's main exit, casting anxious glances toward the flood of reporters gathering near the perimeter fence. TV station vans, he recognized W News among them, had lined up outside, microphones, cameras, and bright lights pointed at the front doors, waiting for a statement, a glimpse of the old black veteran who had been arrested under mysterious circumstances. Ramirez and Dalton hurried John to the SUV, weaving through the throng of reporters. Questions flew from every direction. "Mr. Bowman, why were you arrested? Is Maplewood Police guilty of racial profiling? Are you pressing charges? Do you have anything to say to the people of Maplewood?" John felt the crush of bodies and the flash of cameras momentarily disorient him. For all his calm under the threat of real bullets in Vietnam, this was a different type of ambush. He held a hand up, trying to say something, but Ramirez urged him gently forward. "We'll do this the right way," she whispered, guiding him into the back seat. The SUV's doors slammed shut. Muffling the clamor outside, Agent Dalton turned the key in the ignition, and they pulled away from the curb. "We'll head to a secure location," he said, voice tight with concentration. "We've spoken to your friend Colonel Friedman, and he's coordinating with us to ensure your rights are upheld and that the officers responsible are investigated." John leaned back in his seat, shoulders slumping. "I never wanted it to go this far," he murmured, gazing out the window at the reporters who chased them on foot before giving up. "But I can't stand the thought of it happening to someone else." Ramirez nodded solemnly. "We understand. Sometimes change only happens when the light's bright enough for everyone to see what's wrong." John absorbed her words, recalling how often he'd stood at protest lines, marched, wrote letters, pleaded with officials to do the right thing. Perhaps fate had placed him in Maplewood for precisely this reason, not just to speak to students about Vietnam but to spark a confrontation that might bring about real change. They drove for about 15 minutes out of Maplewood, heading into a neighboring town called Fairview, where the FBI had a small field office. The building was unmarked, inconspicuous, sitting in a quiet industrial park. Ramirez and Dalton ushered John inside, passing through metal detectors and security checkpoints until they reached a windowless room with neutral-colored walls, a round table, and 3 chairs. "Make yourself comfortable," Dalton said gently. "Can we get you anything? Water? Coffee?" John hesitated. His throat felt dry, and he was beginning to realize how little he'd eaten since early that morning. "Some water would be good," he admitted. Dalton stepped out, leaving John and Ramirez alone. She leaned against the table, arms folded, studying him with a mixture of respect and compassion. "Mr. Bowman," she began softly, "I've read your service record. You've been through a lot, not just overseas, but here at home. I know this isn't easy for you." He nodded, memories flooding his mind. Train rides where he had to sit in the colored section. Restaurants that refused to serve him. The glares he received when he wore his uniform in certain towns. "No, it isn't," he admitted. "But I'm tired of letting things slide. My father always told me, speak up, or let it keep happening." Ramirez offered him a small, encouraging smile. "That's exactly why we're here." Dalton returned with a bottle of water and set it before John. "Let's talk about what happened today, from the moment you stepped off the bus in Maplewood until we arrived at the station." And so John recounted every detail. He described the officer's skepticism, the forceful arrest, the humiliating pat-down, the confusion at the station, and his relief at seeing Ramirez and Dalton burst in. The agents took meticulous notes, occasionally asking him to clarify times or specific words said by the officers. John's voice trembled at times, but he pressed on, determined to ensure the truth was documented. When he finished, Dalton closed his notepad. "We'll be in contact with the Department of Justice. Civil rights violations are taken very seriously, especially in cases involving veterans. There may also be local statutes broken by the officers who detained you without cause." Ramirez straightened. "We also have reason to believe that the Maplewood PD has had prior incidents of racial profiling. Our office has looked into them before, but never had a case with such clear evidence. This could lead to a broader investigation." John placed the nearly empty bottle of water on the table, exhaling heavily. I don't want to destroy the department. I just want accountability. Those officers need to understand they can't treat people that way." Ramirez nodded. "Understandable. The process may take time, but if we have your cooperation and the evidence from the station recordings, as well as eyewitness accounts from bystanders, the case is strong." For a moment, they all sat in reflective silence. Then Dalton said, "Colonel Friedman is in Raleigh right now. He wants to meet you for dinner if you're up to it. He's been on the phone non-stop since he heard about your arrest, rallying support." John's eyes misted at the mention of Friedman. They'd been in basic training together decades ago. Friedman's influence and connections had saved more than a few veterans struggling with bureaucracy. "Yes," John said, voice thick. "Yes, I'd like that." Back in Maplewood, the police department was in chaos. The media had flooded the parking lot and sidewalks, demanding answers. Officers could barely leave the building without facing a barrage of microphones. Inside, Chief Nancy Keller, a lean woman in her early 50s with short-cropped hair, had just returned from her fundraiser in Raleigh only to find an unmitigated disaster. Chief Keller strode into the station lobby, where Linda, the administrative assistant, was juggling phones that rang off the hook. Reporters were calling. State officials were calling. Random citizens from all over the country were calling to voice their outrage. Linda's cheeks were flushed as she jotted down messages at lightning speed. "Chief Keller," Linda said breathlessly, "we have at least 24 messages from reporters, the mayor's office, some civil rights organizations." Keller raised a hand to hush her. "Where are the officers responsible for arresting Mr. Bowman?" Linda gestured toward the back. "Higgins, Reyes, and Brown are in the briefing room. They're waiting for you." Scowling, Keller marched toward the briefing room door. She pushed it open to find the 3 officers seated at a table, their expressions a mixture of tension, fear, and anger. Higgins stood up immediately. "Chief, let me explain." Keller cut him off, slamming the door behind her. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. A 72-year-old veteran? The FBI on my doorstep? I have the mayor calling, threatening to fire me if I can't get this under control." Reyes tried to defend himself. "We had a call about a suspicious person, and we responded." Keller took a deep breath, fighting to maintain composure. "Responding to a call doesn't mean you haul in an old man without probable cause, especially one who gave you his ID and explained exactly why he was here." Her voice rose in frustration. "Do you have any idea what this department is up against now? Civil rights lawyers are lining up to take this case." Higgins' fists clenched. He barked out, the man was uncooperative, "Chief." He got mouthy. "Enough." Keller snapped. She was shaking with rage. "I watched the station security footage. I saw how you handled him, throwing him in cuffs, ignoring his explanation, refusing to let him speak for himself. That's not how we operate. Or at least, that's not how we're supposed to operate." Brown kept his eyes on the floor, unable to say a word. He recalled how uncomfortable he felt arresting John Bowman, how his instincts screamed that it was wrong, but he'd gone along with Higgins and Reyes. Keller sank into a chair, rubbing her temples. "I've suspended both of you, Higgins, Reyes, pending an internal investigation. Brown, you'll remain on administrative duty until further notice. The Department of Justice might come knocking." "Actually, no, they're definitely coming knocking. You'd all better lawyer up." Higgins opened his mouth as if to argue, but Keller's glare stopped him cold. "Go home," she ordered, "before the press sees you, and pray this doesn't become a federal case." Reyes and Higgins, both shell-shocked, exited the room, shoulders slumped. Brown lingered, tears pooling in his eyes. "Chief," he whispered, "I'm sorry." Keller's anger softened for a moment. Brown was just a rookie, still, she couldn't absolve him entirely. "Why didn't you stop them?" she asked quietly. He shook his head, voice trembling. "They're my senior officers. I didn't want to lose my job." Keller sighed. "Go on. We'll talk more when the investigators come." Brown left, shoulders drooping in shame. Keller leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. The weight of Maplewood's turmoil pressed on her. This was more than just a departmental scandal, it was personal, moral, and deeply reflective of a system that allowed such injustices to happen. She knew the FBI's presence in town would mean combing through years of records, complaints, and possibly new revelations of misconduct. It could tear the entire Maplewood Police Department apart if they didn't address the rot within. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the streets of Maplewood in orange light, Chief Keller held a hasty press conference on the station's front steps. Cameras and reporters crowded around, their flashlights and microphones forming a chaotic sea of demands and curiosity. Town residents gathered behind the press, some holding signs that read, "Justice for Bowman," and "No more racial profiling." The energy in the air felt like a powder keg ready to explode. Chief Keller approached the makeshift podium, her face stern. The local channel, W, was live. She cleared her throat. "Good evening. My name is Nancy Keller, Chief of the Maplewood Police Department. Earlier today, an incident occurred involving Mr. John Bowman, a decorated U.S. Army veteran who was detained by Maplewood police officers without probable cause. I want to publicly apologize to Mr. Bowman for how he was treated." Effective immediately, the two officers most directly involved, Officers Higgins and Reyes, are suspended pending investigation. An internal affairs review is underway, and the Department of Justice is opening its own inquiry. We will cooperate fully. Her statement continued, but the crowd muttered and jeered, demanding more than apologies. Some called for resignations, others for immediate arrests. At one point, a middle-aged black woman shouted, "And what about all the others who've been profiled?" Keller's voice faltered, she had no easy answer. She wrapped up, "Our department will undergo thorough retraining and oversight. We promise transparency and accountability." As she stepped away from the podium, the crowd erupted with more questions, but Keller left without addressing them. She felt the suffocating pressure of the moment, her career likely hanging by a thread, her conscience weighed down by guilt. Across town, in the hush of the FBI's field office, John Bowman watched the live broadcast on a small TV in the lounge area. Next to him sat Colonel Martin Friedman, the old friend whose phone calls had set federal involvement in motion. Friedman, tall and sturdy, a few years younger than John, carried a gentle yet authoritative air. When the broadcast ended, Friedman turned to John, placing a hand on his shoulder. "I'm orders." John shook his head. "It's not your fault. In some ways, it's been coming for a long time." Friedman nodded thoughtfully. "The point is, now they can't sweep it under the rug." John took a sip of coffee. The day's events had left him exhausted, yet he felt a glimmer of hope. Indeed, the story had grown so large that the police department couldn't ignore or hide it. There would be investigations, public hearings, maybe even lawsuits. If nothing else, maybe the Maplewood PD would be forced to change. The following weeks passed in a whirlwind. The Department of Justice officially launched a civil rights investigation into Maplewood Police Department's practices. FBI agents returned to Maplewood, combing through arrest records, complaint filings, and body cam footage from the past several years. They interviewed numerous citizens who came forward with their own stories of questionable stops and searches. Officer Higgins and Officer Reyes bore the brunt of the public outrage. News vans regularly staked out their homes. Neighborhood kids whispered about how the cops messed with the wrong vet. Their families received threatening phone calls, though John Bowman publicly condemned such retaliation, urging peace and due process. "Let justice handle them," he said in a televised interview. "We don't want violence. We want accountability." Under mounting pressure, Maplewood's mayor convened a special town hall meeting. Residents packed the community center, some wearing T-shirts with John's face on them and the words, "He served us. We failed him." When John arrived, the crowd erupted in cheers. He humbly raised a hand, eyes scanning the sea of faces. He recognized the fervor and anger, remembering how the civil rights protests felt in his youth, equal parts hopeful and dangerous. Chief Keller addressed the crowd first, stammering through a pledge to reform. She was met with a mixture of applause and jeers. Then the mayor called John Bowman to the podium. When John stood, the room fell silent. He began quietly, "I've seen war zones abroad, and I've seen tension at home. But in all my years, I've found that true change only comes when we confront our flaws honestly." His eyes roamed over the officers who stood at the back of the room, shoulders tense. He recognized Brown among them, looking pale. John continued, "I don't want Maplewood to tear itself apart. I just want this department, this town, to treat every citizen with dignity. That's why I'm standing here. Not to condemn everyone wearing a badge, but to demand those badges be worn with honor." Thunderous applause followed. Many rose from their seats, chanting his name. Outside, reporters captured the scene, broadcasting Maplewood's day of reckoning to audiences across the country. Eventually, the internal investigation concluded. Evidence mounted that Higgins and Reyes had a history of pretextual stops, predominantly targeting people of color. Brown, it turned out, had at times voiced objections but had been ignored or reprimanded by his superiors. The FBI's findings aligned with the Department of Justice's ongoing probe, and it wasn't long before formal charges were brought against Higgins and Reyes for violating John Bowman's civil rights. Further lawsuits threatened additional officers who had participated in or covered up similar incidents in the past. Higgins and Reyes appeared in court looking haggard, each flanked by defense attorneys who tried to argue they were just following department procedure. But the avalanche of evidence, including witness statements and body cam footage, refuted that claim. In a dramatic moment, Officer Brown took the stand, reluctantly testifying that Higgins and Reyes had dismissed Jay's identification and invitation letter outright, labeling them fake simply because they'd assumed a black man in an army jacket was up to no good. Brown's confession brought tears to his eyes, but it sealed the fate of his fellow officers. The jury returned a guilty verdict on multiple counts, including wrongful arrest and civil rights abuses. Sentencing would come later, but the weight of the conviction itself felt like a seismic shift in Maplewood. Outside the courthouse, a throng of reporters waited for the verdict's reaction. Higgins, disheveled and pale, slipped out a side entrance with his lawyer. Cameras caught him anyway, capturing the moment he shoved a reporter's microphone away. He was met with angry taunts from protesters and demands that he apologize to John Bowman. The once proud officer who strutted around Maplewood with authority now found himself unemployable in law enforcement, his pension on the line, and his name stained by scandal. Reyes fared no better. His marriage strained by the stress of the trial, his finances drained by legal fees. The entire ordeal served as a brutal lesson in how swiftly one's misuse of power could boomerang back with relentless force. Officer Brown, meanwhile, faced his own reckoning. Though not criminally charged, he was haunted by guilt. He approached John Bowman in private one afternoon outside the courthouse, waiting anxiously until John concluded an interview with a local reporter. "Mr. Bowman," Brown stammered, eyes fixed on the pavement, I want to say I'm sorry." John studied the young officer's anguished face, remembering how Brown had seemed uncertain and frightened during the arrest. "I appreciate that," John replied gently. "I know it's not easy to stand up to superiors. But in the end, you did the right thing, telling the truth." Brown's eyes welled. "I should have stopped them sooner." John placed a reassuring hand on the officer's shoulder. "Courage sometimes comes late," he said. "But at least it came. Maybe next time you'll act sooner. That's how we grow. Take that lesson with you." Tears spilled down Brown's cheeks, and he nodded, a mix of regret and relief. They parted ways, and John reflected that, in all his battles, foreign and domestic, compassion mattered as much as justice. That young officer might change. Might become a better man because he'd been forced to confront his complicity. And that, John thought, was worth something. The Maplewood Police Department did not emerge unscathed. Under threat of a federal consent decree, Chief Keller stepped down, citing personal reasons. In reality, she saw the writing on the wall and preferred to exit before she could be forced out. A new chief was appointed, an outsider from the Raleigh PD named Donald Ford, known for his commitment to community policing and reform. Ford brought sweeping changes, mandatory anti-bias training, the creation of a community oversight board, and updated policies on stop-and-search procedures. It wasn't an overnight fix, and many Maplewood residents remained skeptical. But seeing Higgins and Reyes held accountable in court sent a strong message. The new chief's attempts to bridge gaps, attending community meetings, personally patrolling neighborhoods, helped mend some of the trust that had been shattered. As for John Bowman, he found himself thrust into an unwanted spotlight. He was inundated with interview requests, invitations to speak at universities and civil rights organizations, even job offers from veterans advocacy groups. But the old soldier yearned for a quieter life, writing his memoirs and spending time with the grandchildren he rarely saw. Still, John recognized that his voice carried weight. Whenever he felt the cause warranted it, he'd agree to speak at events, sharing not only his war stories but the lessons he learned from Maplewood. He'd say, "I fought on foreign soil for freedoms that we must protect right here at home, and it starts with each of us, in our own communities." In one memorable instance, he returned to Maplewood High at Miss Anderson's invitation, not to talk about Vietnam, but to speak on civic responsibility. The auditorium was packed again. This time, he shared how fundamental it was to challenge injustice peacefully, persistently, and to never become complacent when someone else's rights are trampled. The students listened with rapt attention, aware that they were hearing living history. Afterward, Miss Anderson presented him with a framed collection of thank-you notes from the students. Many had written messages like, "You inspired me to stand up for what's right," and, "I didn't understand what veterans go through until you spoke." John read each message carefully, tears brimming. It reminded him that while adversity could be cruel, it could also spark hope and transformation. Maplewood learned a profound lesson from the day John Bowman was wrongfully arrested, and later vindicated by the swift intervention of the FBI. The officers who misused their authority faced justice, while the community recognized that quiet prejudice could no longer hide in dark corners. John's story, and the nationwide attention it drew, set the stage for lasting change, new leadership at the Maplewood Police Department, a push for accountability, and a renewed commitment to the ideals John had fought to preserve. But this tale doesn't end with a single town's transformation. It's a call for each of us to stand up against unjust actions wherever we see them. Now, we invite you to keep this momentum alive. If you believe in fairness and respect for all, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. By amplifying this story, you help ensure its lessons reach the eyes and ears of those who need it most. Thank you.